The Victron BMV-712 battery monitor. Yep, that's what we're going to be talking about today. It's one of the coolest, most helpful, and universal mods you can add to your RV. And today, you'll see it installed both on an overlander and a 44-foot fifth wheel. We'll cover 3 points: why you absolutely need this mod on your rig, how to install it, where to get it, and at the end, I'll tell you if I have any regrets or if I'd buy it all over again. So stay tuned. Hey, welcome to my channel, Adventure Rocks, which exists to build up the family by providing resources to enjoy the great outdoors together. Now, for those of you who've been watching some of my other videos, you know that I rent out this cool overlander here behind me. And in summer of 2020, I created a fairly long orientation video. It was about 45 minutes. And it was intended for my renters to watch beforehand to get familiar with the rig. Well, it turns out a lot of other people found it interesting, tuned in to watch it, and that has garnered a lot of questions like, how did you do the sync mod, or where did the tongue storage box come from? And so I've decided to start a new series here on the channel that's all devoted to upgrades and modifications. Now, the goal here is to enhance the time you spend with your family in the outdoors with clever solutions and mods to those pesky problems. Most of what you'll see has already been completed, meaning it's not going to be a step-by-step documentary. Instead, it will focus on tips and tricks to do the install, a product review, and of course, more importantly, where to buy the items. I will include affiliate links in the description below, so if you do like the videos, be sure to click on those links to support the channel. Now, as a bonus, in addition to upgrades and mods on this cool overlanding rig, I'll also be featuring my own personal rig, a 44-foot fifth wheel. So you'll definitely want to click the subscribe button. There's some really cool upgrades and mods that will enhance the time you spend with your family. So if you're not already following, be sure to click on the subscribe button to get all the latest videos. And if you really like it, click the thumbs up button. All right, now back to the video. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get started on the Victron BMV-712 battery monitor. Now, why would you want this on your rig in the first place? Well, almost every RV comes with a basic 4 LED battery monitor built into your control panel monitoring station. Folks, whether you've got a 2010 travel trailer or a 2020 model, chances are it'll come with one very similar to this one here on the NoBo 10.6. It has markings for empty, 1/3, 2/3, and full. Now let's move over to another example here on a 2019 Hemisphere 378FL fifth wheel. Notice how it's pretty much the same. You've got for the battery, empty, 1/3, 2/3, and full. Now this fifth wheel is considered entry to mid-level, and although it's considerably more expensive than the NoBo 10.6, it has almost the exact same monitor. There are some higher-end fifth wheels and Class A units featuring digital gauges, whether via the in-command system or a similar one, but the bulk of RVs on the road today have these same monitors with 4 LEDs from the factory. Think about what this is telling you. Basically, you know if your battery is at 0%, 33%, 66%, or 100% full. What about if you're at 50% or 75%? Where will the gauge show then? Hopefully closest to the nearest third interval, right? But that leaves a lot of guesswork. If your gauge is registering 2/3 full, are you at 66% or 50% or 75%? It could potentially be any of those levels and still read the same readout on the gauge. And folks, there is a long-standing joke in the RV industries that these gauges are notoriously inaccurate, especially on the tanks. But if you think about it, a lot of the problems surrounding the inaccuracy has to do with the limited intervals shown on the gauge. With only 4 LEDs or levels, there's only so much it can output. The problem with these all too common gauges is that you really don't know where you stand, especially on the battery. And if power is essential to you, such as keeping your 12-volt fridge cold, or maybe it's freezing outside and you need a furnace blower to run, then it's really important to know precisely how much battery you have left. And that's where the Victron BMV-12 shines. It solves the problem entirely by not only giving you the exact percentage of battery life left, but also other helpful stats such as time remaining, kind of like miles to empty on your car, or current consumption being used. Not only that, but it has Bluetooth. And so you can test pair it to your phone, Android or Apple, and check the stats anywhere in your rig, possibly even from your tow vehicle, depending on the distance. Maybe even from your house while it's in storage if the rig is parked close enough. I find the Bluetooth range is about 25 to 50 feet with some minor obstructions before it loses the ability to connect. All right, let's take a look at the app. The visual interface is very well presented. I'll throw up some screenshots so you can see the finished product. When the app loads, you just select your rig. It can support multiple monitors if you have more than one rig like I do. So I can see both the NoBo and fifth wheel here. Then once you select yours, it'll immediately show the current state of charge from 0 to 100% with a nice gauge. You'll see the current battery voltage, the current being used in amps, the power consumption in watts, consumed amp hours, and the time remaining based on the most recent use. Now, if you're plugged into shore power like I am now, it'll just show infinite. And if you've got a motorized RV like a Class A, B, or C, you can also connect it to monitor your starting battery for the engine. As in a motorized RV, you'll typically have a battery bank for starting your rig's engine and a separate battery bank for the rig itself. So extremely versatile. You'll also see a history tab that shows you cumulative stats and records. You can see here on mine, the deepest I've ever discharged my fifth wheel is 104 amp hours on a single charge. Yep, that's on a 100 amp hour rated lithium ion battery from Renogy, which I'll cover in another video. Very impressive though that the battery outperformed its rating. But anyway, back to the app. You'll also have a trends tab showing the live stats. Now I've unplugged my rig from shore power temporarily and I've run some lights and such just to give you an idea of what that graph looks like when it's live. Last, there's a settings sprocket icon where you can configure the battery monitor. So instead of having to use the buttons on the display itself, which can be very time consuming, you can set everything right here in the app. Super helpful. Now, a lot of times you get a gadget that connects via Bluetooth and the phone app is almost like an afterthought or just very poorly implemented, making it kind of pointless. But this one here, I think, is very well thought out, super helpful, and I think it's one of the strongest selling points to buy the Victron BMV-712. And if you don't have a smartphone or you have no desire to connect via Bluetooth, you can still get the bulk of the info off the display of the unit itself. It's backlit and you can set it to light up when you press the buttons or just stay on all the time. Aesthetically, it has a nice round bezel to it, which I love. It instantly cues you in that it's a gauge, and it looks really nice when it's flush mounted to your rig. I think what I like most about the BMV-712 is that you can just add it to pretty much any RV. It's really a fairly simple upgrade, and most of the time you can get it for under $200. It works with traditional lead acid batteries, AGM batteries, lithium ion batteries. It'll work with no solar or with solar. It's that one upgrade that you can start with, and if you end up upgrading other components on your rig, such as the batteries or solar or even an inverter, it'll continue to grow and be compatible with those new upgrades. So I think it's one of the smartest upgrades to start with, as it won't be obsolete if you continue to upgrade your rig down the road, and it's a good entry-level product to help you get familiar with your rig and the electrical system. Now let's talk about the install, how to install the Victron BMV-712. We're going to look at two rigs today, first here in the NoBo 10.6, which is like a small overlander, and then also in the Hemisphere 378 fifth wheel. So you'll see two fairly different installs between the two rigs, but hopefully you'll find some similarities to your rig to help you get it installed. As I mentioned, this install is fairly straightforward, so even if you've never done anything electrical on your rig before, I think this is a great starting point. And again, it'll help you get acquainted with your rig for other future upgrades. The first step is to decide where you want to locate the display, the round bezel that you see here in the NoBo 10.6. Typically, you'll want to locate it somewhere inside your rig where you can see it. Oftentimes, folks choose to locate it near your existing control panel. Here in the NoBo 10.6, the existing control panel is outside the cabin in the slide-out kitchen. And you certainly could put it here, but I really wanted mine inside the rig's cabin, so I chose to put it in the forward wall here in the cabinetry. You can mount it on just about any wall thickness, whether a 1/4 inch or 3/4 inch thick, but the more sturdy and stable, the better, since you'll be pushing buttons on it and such. Now in the Hemisphere 378FL fifth wheel, my existing control panel is about midship in the rig. Now keep this in mind, there's a data cable that runs between the display and a shunt which goes near your battery bank, and I'll cover that next. But the cable that runs between the display and shunt is 10 meters or about 32 feet long, and that's supplied by Victron. It's an RJ12 cable, which is basically an old school landline phone cable. So if you need a longer one, you can certainly buy one. But that is one consideration to think through when choosing a location. You'll also want to think through the accessibility and complexity of fishing the data cable between your display and the battery shunt. Here in my fifth wheel, it certainly is possible to do, as the RV interior walls are almost always hollow with the exception of wires and pipes. If I chose to put my display here with my existing controls, it would mean fishing a wire down this interior wall, then going down into the underbelly between the frame and then back up to the battery bank at the front of the rig. To get access to the frame, I need to take down this plastic corrugated panel on the underside, which on most RVs is one long continuous sheet, and then run it to the front of my rig where the battery bank is. And that's a fairly labor-intensive project, and it'd be about 40 feet of cable needed. Now again, that certainly is possible to fish a cable from my control panel here to the battery bank, but I started thinking on my rig, the location of the display itself isn't as important as I'll be mostly accessing it via Bluetooth on the phone app. So I started exploring alternate locations that might be easier and less labor-intensive to run the data cable, and that's when I settled on putting it forward right along the staircase here. I already had a bank of switches, as you can see, and one thing I really like about this location is that you can see it from outside the rig if I simply open the door. It's about eye level if I need to take a quick peek. But the biggest advantage of this location is I can easily run the cable through the basement storage on the fifth wheel, and I can use the existing 32-foot long cable that it comes with. So all in all, I weighed the options and I chose this location for the display in my fifth wheel. Now, if you've got a fifth wheel, you can probably do a very similar solution, as all fifth wheels will have some kind of basement storage, and most will have steps going up to the upper level like mine. Now, the next step is to determine the location for the BMV shunt, and here's what it looks like. The shunt should go as close to your battery bank as possible for accuracy on the readings, and it should be in a dry space that isn't exposed to the elements. On the NoBo 10.6, I chose to place it right up under the front frame member within the plastic corrugated underbelly panel so it's protected. Now, I already sealed up mine here with foam, so I'm not going to undo it for the video. But all I had to do was remove these hex head screws that are securing the corrugated plastic to the bottom there, to the underbelly, just enough to get access to this front corner here. Then I just took the BMV shunt and screwed it to the front frame member here inside, and I just used some sheet metal screws, which weren't included with the kit, but they're readily available at the hardware store. On the Hemisphere 378 fifth wheel, I chose to put the BMV shunt right inside the battery bank compartment, which is a nice access door and it's out of the elements. And again, I just use sheet metal screws to secure the shunt. Now, what is the purpose of the shunt? It basically interrupts the negative terminal of your battery bank, almost if it's listening in, and that's in quotes obviously, but it's almost as if it's listening into your battery all the time to meter the usage and give you the stats. And that's mainly why you want it so close to your battery as possible for accuracy. So once you determine the location for the display and the shunt, the next step is to mount them and route the cables and last make the connections. Mounting the display is as easy as drilling a hole or cutting a hole where you want it. The size of the circle cutout is 52 millimeters, which is just over 2 inches. I used a 2-inch Forstner bit. 52 millimeters is actually really 2 1/16 to be exact. So you can also use a 2-inch hole saw, or ideally a 2 1/16 inch hole saw. If you use a 2-inch hole, you may have to gently file the opening depending on how precise your hole diameter is. I would definitely recommend a Forstner bit or a hole saw as opposed to tracing a hole and using a jigsaw, as the circle needs to be perfect in order for the trim to align here. There's not much room for error. So take your time in drilling the hole, hold it nice and steady, to keep the bit from jumping or sliding around, because you only get one shot at it. Now, if you do mess up or you don't have a bit, you can also use a jigsaw and cut a rough or less precise hole, and then use the supplied square trim kit. I already threw mine out, otherwise I'd show you, but it does come from the manufacturer with the kit. I personally like the round bezel. I think it looks just really neat there, but it is nice to have that square bezel in case you need it. All right, so once you get that hole cut, then you can route the data cable from your newly cut hole all the way to your battery bank where the BMV shunt should be located. On the NoBo 10.6, that was fairly easy, as I could, with my arms, thread it up from the shunt, which is right behind the underbelly panel, and then go up through the frame through the existing hole in the floor here where the freshwater tank is located. And you can, of course, see then the other side of the water tank from the kitchen slide here. And then you just thread it up through there. And next I went up behind this tall panel all along the top to get to my display location. On the fifth wheel, I was able to run the cable through the basement storage along the upper deck frame there. And I just went to the perimeter, found some existing wires, and traced those all the way to the battery bank. And then I just used tie wraps to keep everything neat and tight together. And then took the excess data cable and wound it up and tie wrapped it as well. All right, the next step is to plan the connection between the battery shunt and your battery bank. Now, Victron doesn't supply this cable as the thickness and length varies based on your install. You can, of course, make your own, but the cable should be pretty thick gauge. Depending on your rig, I'd recommend at least 4 gauge. You can do thicker, such as 2 gauge or 0 AWG or even 00 AWG. But for most rigs, 4 gauge will be just fine. When you do heavy solar installs or high power inverters, that's really where those thicker cables are needed sometimes. Now, like I said, you can make your own cable, but you really want a good solid connection on the terminals on each end. And unless you've got a hydraulic crimp laying around, you're probably better off buying a cable already made. They're readily available on Amazon in different links, and I'll include an affiliate link in the description below. On the NoBo 10.6, I used a 4-foot long 4-gauge wire to go from my battery negative terminal out here in the battery box to the shunt just inside the frame. I wanted the cable to follow the frame as opposed to a direct path, and so that's why I opted for a longer 4-foot length. On the 5th wheel, it was a bit closer, as you can see, so I just used a 2-foot 4-gauge cable. All right, so your battery's negative terminal should be connected directly to the shunt, meaning you'll remove the existing negative cable on your rig and replace it with your new negative cable running directly to the shunt. But don't lose that old negative cable, as then it connects to the other side of the BMV shunt. Again, think of it just as interrupting the connection to listen in to your battery and the electrical system. The shunt is labeled on both sides, so just be sure to attach the negative cables to the right ends. Next, your battery monitor needs power itself, and so Victron supplies a thinner red cable that's 2 meters or 6.5 feet that will run from the shunt to the positive terminal of your battery. Now, this is very important. You want this cable directly attached to your battery's positive terminal. Don't go to your battery cutoff switch or somewhere else on your rig, as ideally you want that battery monitor to always have power. Don't worry, it is extremely low draw, so it's not going to run down your battery. Now, the reason you want it connected always is so that you can monitor it even if your rig's battery disconnect is engaged. And you want it to be as accurate as possible. If it loses power, the accuracy of the readings will decline since it doesn't have a full picture of your use. So the red positive cable feeding power to the shunt will go directly to your battery's positive terminal. You can see there is an inline fuse there that they give you, and this connection is not interrupted, as you want it always supplying power to the battery shunt. Depending on your kit, you may need to buy a small ring loop terminal and crimp it onto your red lead. Those are readily available at your local auto parts store, and you can just match up the diameter of your battery posts and crimp it on. And then the other end of the red cable goes into the shunt where it is labeled. So now we've got our positive connection, our power going to the shunt. We've got our negative connections, one going from the battery to the shunt and then from the shunt to your negative on the rig. And last is the data cable going between the display and the shunt. That's the RJ12 cable, and it just clips right in on both sides. Then you'll secure the display, which simply has a threaded ring that fastens on the backside and then clamps down on your mounting surface, so you just tighten it up by hand. Now, on a side note, as you're wiring everything up, you can connect the negative terminal on your battery last for safety. That'll keep everything powered down until you're all done. Once you reconnect your negative cable to your battery, that'll restore power to everything on the rig, and now your display should light up instantly. Initially, you'll want to program the unit to your battery type and capacity, as the accuracy of the readings is based on the settings and parameters used. What's so nice about this unit is you can use it with your standard lead acid batteries or lithium ion batteries and just about everything in between. Now, each battery will require unique settings, so I can't tell you exactly what to program, but I'll include a link below on recommended settings for the Battleborn 100 amp hour battery, which is going to be nearly identical for the Renogy lithium ion battery. The most important number is your amp hours, which if you have lead acid batteries, you may have to manually calculate, as not all manufacturers list that spec on the battery. If you Google it, you'll see there's various methods for calculating that, but the most common way is to take your CCA or cold cranking amps rating off the lead acid battery and then divide it by a constant of 7.25. So if you have a lead acid battery with 600 cold cranking amps, then you divide it by 7.25 and you'll end up with about 83 amp hours. Again, do some research online, as your battery may be different, but for lithium ion batteries, it's pretty straightforward, as the manufacturers almost always rate them in amp hours up front. When you're programming the settings, you can do it initially off the display itself, but it's actually much faster to pair via Bluetooth with your phone and program via the app. So I definitely recommend pairing it first, and of course you can set a unique pin and a unique name for your battery monitor. All right, where can you get this same setup? Well, I'm going to include links in the description below to the items I use, starting with the battery monitor itself, the negative cables, the ring terminals, and a similar Forstner bit. Victron has several variants of battery monitors too, and while I use the BMV-712, they may release a new one that looks similar in the future. So either way, just make sure you get the one with Bluetooth built in, as there are other units without Bluetooth. Last question, do I have any regrets, or would I do this mod all over again? Yes, I would definitely complete this mod all over again on both rigs. Having accurate and precise battery readings solves so many problems, from range anxiety to knowing when your battery is nearly depleted. For lead acid batteries, you can actually set the monitor to only utilize 50% of your battery's amp hours to protect it, and thereby you get a more realistic picture of your usable capacity while protecting the battery from being discharged below that 50% threshold. Of course, with lithium ion, that's not a concern, but that is another nice feature on this versatile monitor. Would I choose the same positions on the displays on both rigs? Yes, I think so. I like the idea of having the inside of the cabin on the NoBo. And really here on the fifth wheel, the ease of installation, even though it's a slightly atypical location, it's worked out just fine in the end. On a side note, if you're just not comfortable routing a data wire to the remote display on your rig, or maybe you just don't have access, you certainly could keep the display right near the shunt itself and then just connect via Bluetooth all the time. So that's another really easy way to install it, and you could even decide later to relocate the display to a more permanent location in the future. Just leave the full length of your data cable intact. Again, I want to highlight just how versatile this upgrade is. You can use it with your lead acid batteries, and then if you upgrade to lithium ion later on, you just reprogram the monitor. Or if you upgrade to solar later, it'll automatically read how much solar energy you're supplying to the batteries, and that's assuming, of course, your draw is constant. But whether you add an inverter or another 12-volt appliance, it'll automatically show the combined use of everything being powered off your battery bank. I also love that this upgrade's only about $200 or so. I have noticed the price does fluctuate a good bit. I bought one for about $165 and then another for closer to $200. So just check around and make sure you're getting the best price. All right, that's it for our video today. If you found it helpful, be sure to click on the thumbs up button. If you're not already subscribed, click that subscribe button. There are some really exciting videos coming up in this series that you do not want to miss. Be sure to also support the channel by checking out the affiliate links in the description below. Last, leave me questions or comments and I'll try to answer as many as possible. And as always, thanks for watching.